Good morning and welcome to the Desco Europe webinar on footwear and flooring personnel grounding systems. My name is Tim Hacker. I'm the Regional Sales Manager for Desco Europe, and joining me on this webinar is Stephen Burns. Good morning, Stephen.
Morning, Tim. Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us. Tim said I'll be helping today with answering questions. So you'll see up on the screen there. There are, depending on which version of webinar you're using, there'll be a couple of ways that you submit your questions. It'll either look like the image on the right of the screen or the left of the screen. Tim, it hasn't actually moved on. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So please, as we go through, do submit your questions in there. We'll ask as many as we can throughout the webinar. We'll pause once in the middle for some questions, and again at the end. If you've been to previous webinars, you'll know that's mostly how we've been doing it. So it'd be great to have your questions as well as the content that we're going to present to you today. Just a very quick question for you as we start. You'll see it coming up on the screen now. So how are you currently grounding operators? What's the primary means of grounding operators for you today? Are you using a footwear flooring system as the primary means? Are you using a wrist strap system as the primary means and you're not using footwear at all? Or are you using wrist straps as the primary means, but you're also using footwear as an auxiliary? It would be great to get your responses on that. We'll just leave the poll open for another 30 seconds or so to get as many responses as we can, and then we'll move on with the webinar. Just another couple of notes about questions. We may or may not get to all of the questions. It depends on time. We do want to try and keep the webinar short. But if you do ask a question, rest assured that if we don't get to it during the webinar, we absolutely will follow up with you by email afterwards to make sure we get an answer to your question. Great, thanks everybody so much for completing the poll. I'll hand back to Tim and we'll move on with the webinar. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Stephen. So the webinar will be split into two parts, and the first part will be looking at the requirements for an ESD flooring system and the different flooring solutions. And in the second part of the webinar, we'll be looking at foot grounders, the different types of foot grounders and tests that can be carried out. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to the table that's on your screen. And this is taken from the European standard, which can be found on the IEC website. Now, the table shows the product qualification and compliance verification for personal grounding, the personal footwear and flooring system, and the test limits to ensure the flooring is in specification to the European standard. Now, the standard says that a periodic voltage generation test should be carried out to verify the voltage is less than 100 volts, and that's measured on at an average of 5 peaks, and we'll show you the equipment needed to perform this test later in the webinar. And we'll focus more on the compliance verification tests as we move along. But for both the product qualification and the compliance verification, there should be a resistance to ground test completed, and that should test within a limit of less than 1 × 10⁹ ohms. Now we'll look at the different products that can be used as an ESD floor, and we will start with the loose lay floor matting. And there are different types of matting, which include vinyl, which is generally cheaper. Rubber, on the other hand, is more durable and can withstand extreme hot and cold temperatures. And anti-fatigue matting, which is designed to provide comfort for personnel who have to stand or walk for long periods of time. And so these are three of the main ones, but we have a floor selection chart, a floor matting selection chart, which is available on the Desco Europe website. Now, the image on your screen now is a link to the floor matting selection chart that we will provide a copy of the PowerPoint presentation to you after this webinar, so that you can follow this link to the selection chart. And here you'll find a full range of our floor matting options and links to the products on the left-hand side. We provide the material construction, the resistance classification to show that these products are in specification to the European standard. And we also provide the best application for the floor matting. So, for example, if you're looking for a mat for use with chairs and casters, we would recommend the statutory DLR2 layer rubber matting. On the other hand, if you were looking for a mat for use around wave solder machines and other challenger manufacturing environments, we would recommend the Stat 3 G2 rubber matting. Now we'll move on to a more permanent floor, which is the 8400 series Statguard vinyl floor tile, which is available in either conductive or dissipative material. Now, the conductive material will test at a range of 2.5 times 10 to the 4 ohms to less than 1 times 10 to the 6 ohms, and the dissipative material will test at 1 times 10 to the 6 ohms to less than 1 times 10 to the 9 ohms. There is a lifetime electrical warranty and certified testing for our 8400 series tile. We do offer a 10-year limited wear warranty as well, and is available in a range of different colours. And this floor tile meets the European standard for the required test limit, making it suitable flooring component for personnel grounding, footwear and flooring systems as a whole. Now, our next product is the freestyle interlocking flooring system, which uses the same top tile, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner there, as the 8400 series vinyl floor tile. However, there's no glue or adhesive that's required, meaning that it can sit on the current floor and could be used immediately, resulting in less downtime, saves money and disruption as well. Now, this is suitable for use over irregular and problem subfloors or for high moisture floors. The ideal application for this interlocking floor tile is used in medium to light duty manufacturing and is in rented space. It's also easy to add to or can be removed to another part of a facility, with minimum fuss. We'll now move on to the Statguard Epoxy. And this is a conductive epoxy, and it measures a point-to-point test and a point-to-ground test of 1 times 10 to the 4 ohms to less than 1 times 10 to the 7 ohms. This is a one-coat, two-part water-based epoxy system, and we do offer a 5-year warranty after the date of installation. Now, these applications include production and warehousing floors. We'll move on to the 4 components of the Statguard floor care system. We'll start with the Statguard floor finish, which will test a point-to-point test at 10 to the 7 ohms to less than 1 times 10 to the 9 ohms. And that's taken in a facility with a relative humidity of 10 to 65%. Now, the Statguard floor finish, is available as a standard product and in a low VOC product as well. And VOC stands for volatile organic compound. And there are many benefits of having a low VOC product, including improvement to air quality, better for the environment, and a more subtle odour. And the floor finish can be used in clean rooms down to class 1000 and can also be used to maintain ESD flooring or to convert a non-ESD floor such as a standard tile or concrete floor to an ESD floor. And it's also ideal if you don't have the budget for the interlocking floor tile or a more permanent floor, or if loose lay matting is an inconvenience. The other 3 components of the Statguard floor care system is the Statguard floor stripper, which will remove a pre-existing ESD floor, so the floor finish on that ESD floor. And using the stripper reduces pH that's left behind from the floor stripping process, as some high pH.
Sorry to interrupt. We just lost the sound there for a split second. So could you could you restart this slide? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no worries. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no worries. So yeah, sorry, I was just saying that these are the other 3 products in the Statguard floor care range. Now we'll start with the floor stripper, which is used to remove pre-existing ESD floor finish, and using the stripper reduces the rinse time and cuts labour costs. The next part is the Statguard floor neutralizer, to neutralise the pH that's left behind from the stripping process, as some pH strippers will leave a residue behind even after several rinses, and this also saves on labour time using using the Statguard floor neutraliser. And the final part that we've got here is the floor cleaner, and it's formulated to clean floors treated with the Statguard floor finish and Statguard low VOC floor finish, and can also be used on other conductive or dissipative floor tiles. Now, all of our floor tiles are, all of our floor care products are manufactured in our Canton facility in Massachusetts, and we do offer tours to our facility. So if you are in the area and would like to visit, please contact us and we will happily arrange a tour for you. And now that concludes the first part of this webinar. Stephen, do we have any questions so far?
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, we do have a few questions on the subject we've just covered, so flooring options. As I mentioned before, we may not get a chance to go through all of these. We'll cover as many as we can and then follow up with everybody who's asked a question by email. So the first question that we'll look at here, someone's asked, is it better to have a dissipative or a conductive floor? And the answer really depends on how you're using it. If you're going to be using it as the primary means of grounding your personnel, it must be conductive. If you have a dissipative floor, it will not meet the spec for the full grounding system, which actually Tim's going to cover in the very early part of the second half of this webinar. So if it's the primary means of grounding, the floor will have to be conductive in order to meet the spec. If all you're looking for is an ESD safe floor, so that's one where it will drain a charge away and it will be low charging by nature, then a dissipative floor is okay. And if a dissipative floor is going to be okay for you, then the solution that you look for within that will be determined by other factors. So Tim's gone through the various types of operation that's going on and things like what kind of traffic will there be? Will there just be foot traffic or carts, those kind of things. So dissipative or conductive is really determined by whether it's going to be a primary means of ground or not. Next question here somebody has said that they have tested their factory floor, which is simply concrete at the moment, and they find that the resistance is in a dissipative range. Can they use that to ground people? Well, the first thing to say, kind of like we just said, if it's going to be the primary means, dissipative is not going to be sufficient. It needs to be in the conductive range. And the other thing to say is that concrete floors tend to be hygroscopic, which means they will draw moisture out of the atmosphere. And so it's actually the moisture that is transmitting the test, not the concrete itself. And you'll find that if you test the same floor on a drier day, or even later on in the day when it's warmed up a little bit, that moisture in the floor will have evaporated out, and the same floor will test far too high. What you need is a reliable system, and concrete is not going to be reliable. It will go up and down depending on the humidity. Just taking a quick pause there, we do have another poll question to ask you while we ask the last question. So that should be coming up on the screen there. So the question is simply, are you currently exploring flooring options? Are you looking at replacing your floor and you're thinking through what you might like to put down as the new floor? So if you could just take 10 seconds to answer that question for us. We'll answer one more question now, which Tim goes to the floor finish that we were just talking about. So the question is, how do I ground Statguard floor finish? And just to speak more generally about grounding, first of all, almost all of our floors you can lay, if you want to ground it to the building earth, for example, or the electrical earth, you can lay a conductive grid underneath. Various ways you can do that. Copper tape is a common option, and then that copper tape can be routed into the electrical earth. We even supply a part that has that copper tape, and it goes to a test point, which gives you the surface to groundable point test that Tim has mentioned before. With regards to Statguard floor finish, you can do that if you need to, but actually the capacitance of the Statguard floor finish means that so long as it's over 50 square feet, which is just under 5 square meters, so not a very big area, so long as it is a larger area than that, it will actually act as a natural ground. It will become a capacitance reservoir by itself, so it wouldn't need to be grounded additionally. It would provide its own ground. That's as long as it's over that 5 square meter area, which, as we've said, that's not a particularly big area. Most applications would at least be that size. So that's how you would ground ESD floors, and particularly Statguard floor finish. Thank you very much to all of you for your questions. Thank you for answering the poll questions. I'll hand back to Tim for the second portion of the webinar.
Thank you, Stephen. So now we will look at the requirements for footwear, the different types of foot grounders, and testing of an ESD floor. Now this is table 2, which again is taken from the European standard. And I'd like to draw your attention to the compliance verification part of the table. And the resistance to ground test limit is less than 1 times 10 to the 9 ohms. And as you can see from here, there's no lower limit. So if the floor is used to ground personnel, and body voltage tests should be carried out to ensure the operator is less than 100 volts, with the average result taken from the 5 highest peaks. And what we will do in the next few slides, we will show you the equipment that's used to carry out this test. But that is also what's required from the product qualification part of the table to the compliance verification part. Now, we do understand that some companies use ESD shoes and some wear ESD foot grounders, but we're going to have a look at some of the advantages of the ESD of the foot grounders, and these include the one-size-fits-all. They can be worn with the operator's own footwear, which adds to comfort. There's less investment in comparison to ESD shoes, and that ties in with the first bullet point, that one-size-fits-all. Foot grounders usually pass the test as soon as worn, as some shoes will fail, as they may require a warm-up period for the operator's resistance to ground to drop below 35 megohms, making a good connection with the floor. Now, I won't hang around on this slide for too long, but these are we all know what foot grounders look like, but these are different types of foot grounders available, and they range from non-marking heel grounders to the disposable heel grounder and conductive booties. But what I would like to draw your attention to is the selection chart, which again is available on the Desco Europe website, and this chart here in the PowerPoint is a link to the selection chart. And we will send the presentation at the end of the webinar. So as you can see on this selection chart, you can find our full range of foot grounders. We have part numbers, which are at the bottom, and again, they are linked to the individual product. We provide the material that's used, the special feature of the heel grounder. So if we take the non-marking heel grounder, for example, the special feature of this one, it will not mark shoes or floors. And as you can see, for all of our foot grounders, one size fits all, and they're either made in the United Kingdom or the United States of America. So we'll now look at the product qualification methods, and the flooring should have there should be a test carried out on the floor of a resistance to groundable point. If the floor is used to ground personnel, so that means that no wrist straps are worn, it's just a heel grounder of the shoes, then both the resistance and human body model voltage measurements are required. And that's quite a mouthful, so I'm just going to say from now on HBM voltage measurements are required. So the graph at the bottom here, I'd like to just draw your attention to. Now this show is a walk-in test that's performed in the walk-in environment chamber, which includes 12% relative humidity. And we were talking, when we go back to the table, that the results should be taken from an average of 5 peaks. Now, in this part here, you've got the values, and at the bottom there is the average mean. So it will tell you if the flooring is in specification or not, and that can be tested, and the test can be carried out using the body voltage meter and using the ESD floor test sequence, which is the image on the right hand side. And you start with your left foot on number 1, your right foot starts on number 2, and you move in a triangular motion, and you need to make sure that you pick your feet up and place them down, and don't scuff your feet, otherwise you'll get a bad reading on the floor. So we'll now move on to the compliance verification methods, and you'd have to carry out a resistance to ground test on the floor using a surface resistance meter and a 2.5 kilogram probe. If the floor is used to ground personnel, a resistance test of each possible system is required. So that will be the foot grounder and the operator and the flooring. And you can do that by holding a probe. So in the first image on the left-hand side, that's the surface resistance meter with an operator holding a probe just to make sure that the connection is good. One lead plugged into the probe and another lead plugged into the ground to make sure that there's good connection all the way around there. The other test that's required is a periodic check of HPM voltage to verify that it is below 100 volts, again using that body voltage meter. And on the right hand side there is an image of an operator using the body voltage meter with the probe in one hand, wearing their heel grounders on both feet and walking on an ESD safe floor. And all of these tests should be performed on installed flooring. So if you use more than one type of foot grounder, so it all covers all possible variables. And what we mean by that is some operators will wear toe grounders or foot grounders or heel grounders, and visitors more often than not will use disposable heel grounders. And you need to test to make sure all of these comply with the standard and work on the flooring that you have in your facility. So that concludes the second part of this presentation. Stephen, do we have any more questions?
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, we have a few questions on this particular topic, foot grounders and testing. So we'll go through a few of those now. First one, will foot grounders mark my floor? And I suppose if you've just put down a brand spanking new floor, you're going to be concerned about the other equipment marking that floor and foot grounders in particular. And I guess we want to say that not all foot grounders are made equal. Most are going to use a carbon loaded rubber to give the connection between the person wearing the foot grounder and the floor. And more economy versions of heel grounders are going to leave significant marks because of the quality of material being used and those kind of things. Our foot grounders, which will also use a carbon loaded rubber, may leave some marks, but it will be to a much lesser degree. And we have in our product range specifically non-marking foot grounders. So if it's a concern for you that foot grounders are going to leave a mark, then we would just point you towards those. We'd be happy to send a link to the person who asked that question afterwards. Our recommendation always is to request a sample. We're very happy to send out samples for you to try either our standard carbon loaded rubber heel grounders to see how they perform on your floor, or indeed the non-marking versions as well. Try them and see how they get on. Next question here. Do I need to wear 2 heel grounders or can I wear just one? And the answer really is you need to wear 2. We say that if you only wear one, you're only grounded half the time. And Tim's talked in some detail about the body voltage test. That test will reveal the huge spikes in body voltage that you'll experience if you're only wearing 1 foot grounder. So don't take our word for it. The standard calls for testing these things and verifying these things on a regular basis. Do the test. Wear 1 heel grounder, do the body voltage test, and you'll see that body voltage will spike during those parts of the pattern where your grounded foot is off the floor. The last question, before we do the last question, we have one final poll, and it relates to demonstrations of the equipment that Tim has shown us. So the 2 pieces of equipment that we really focused on are the digital surface resistance test kit for those resistance to ground tests, and the body voltage meter to see what voltage is generated on the operator as they walk around in their footwear and on the ESD floor. So if you could let us know if you're interested in a demonstration, we have a virtual demo room where we can schedule with you to have a Skype meeting or a Teams meeting or GoToMeeting to connect by video conference and show you the equipment at a time that's suitable to you. So if you're interested in either of those products, demonstrations for those products, let us know. Drop an answer in the poll there, and we'll get in touch with you to get that scheduled. The last question, we should be finished with inside half an hour today, so that's great. How often do I need to do the human body model voltage test? The standard doesn't give a specific duration or period of how often you should do this test. Our point of view is that if you have selected a new aspect to your system, whether that's footwear or the floor or some other part of the system, we would always recommend a short cycle for periodic testing, because you really need to get used to how it performs. So maybe once or twice a month in that initial period, and over time, of course, you're going to build up a picture of the long-term reliability of your system, and you'll know, for example, how often you need to clean the floor. You'll know if you're using a floor finish, let's say, you'll know how often you need to reapply that floor finish. And once you start to gather that data, then maybe you can think about extending the validation period. I think we would probably say quarterly is fine in most situations, and then again it also comes down to various other factors, like what's the value of the products that you're working on. Do you want to leave a window of 3 months between tests, and at the next periodic cycle you find that it's failing the specification, and potentially all that product has been at risk in the meantime? So there are various things that come into it. Our advice would simply be, with new parts to your system, keep that testing cycle short, so that you can start to build up a picture of how it performs over the long term. Thank you everybody that voted in the poll. We'll close that down now. And I'll hand back to Tim to conclude the webinar.
Thank you, Stephen. On the screen now, you can find my contact details. So if there are any other questions that you think of once you leave today, please ask us and we'll happily answer any of those questions. We've also provided some more resources. So there's the link to the IEC website there where you can purchase a copy of the standard, and the Desco Europe website where you can have a look at all of our products and the selection charts as well. Now, next week's webinar is on resistance measurements, focusing on the surface resistance test kit. And I hope you can join us for that webinar as well. But all it leaves me to say is thank you very much for your time, and we hope to see you again next week.